Okay, wonderful. Okay, everyone, we're ready to get started. I'm glad we were able to give you more chance to talk while we got everything figured out. Okay, my name is Jennifer Shack. I'm Director of Research at Resolution Systems Institute. And I'm here with Nick White, and he will introduce himself some more when he gets up here. And we're going to be talking about how to make ODR accessible to everyone. Mine is really focusing on trust and power imbalance, and I'm going to race through it a bit. But I've got to remember to do that. Okay. So the agenda, I'm going to first talk a little bit about the context so you understand what I'm talking about when I'm talking about it. Talk about access to justice and design, how trust and communication are intertwined and how important communication is about ODR, and then dig into power imbalance and how we as a field primarily need to try to figure out how, as we're going forward with say, AI and any kind of technology, that we're not introducing power imbalances that aren't already there, because there's too many already. Oh. Sorry. I'm doing two different things, getting a little confused. So the context is that I'm focusing on self-represented litigants, people who don't have attorneys, people who tend to have lower education levels, lower income. That's who my organization cares about, and that's our focus. The ODR definition for today is very broad. It's basically technology and any kind of technologically based ODR. And what I'm going to say is going to be based on research on court-based programs, but it is applicable for everyone else. A little background about the research that this is all based on. My team conducted a number of focus groups to figure out why people weren't using ODR and to figure out how they what the barriers were to ODR use amongst self-represented litigants and how they needed to be communicated with about ODR in order to bring down those barriers. We then used that information to conduct usability testing on models that we created, which showed a much greater interest in online dispute resolution, text-based online dispute resolution, than we had seen with the focus groups because we communicated better. And then it's also based on some of our prior research and other people's research as well. I'm forgetting to, sorry, I'm doing this. Okay, what do I mean by access to justice? It's affordable, effective, and efficient. That's what we often think about, but we also need to make sure that it is easy to understand and use so that people can comfortably use it and make good decisions about whether to use it. And that comes in both in the function and in communication. And power imbalances comes back here. They don't introduce power imbalances. So accessible ODR design, communication and function go hand in hand. Too often what we see is a platform being built. Courts are really, and nothing like really being communicated well about it and people not being able to understand it. Courts are very, very bad at communicating across all levels, trying to get better, but tend to be very bad. And so what we saw with some of our research prior even to the focus groups was that people didn't know that ODR existed for them, that they had the opportunity and they didn't know what it was, so they didn't want to use it. So courts should be communicating from the very first point that they're letting people know about it, say with a notice that comes with their summons, all the way through to the end in a way that is understandable, and I will tell you more. When you have good accessible ODR design and good communication, you're going to have trust with the product. And then power imbalances, again. Okay, this is like number one most important. We already saw a lot of data put up on the screen about mobile people using mobile phones to access the internet. Our research found that more than 3/4 or almost 3/4 of people who used a text-based ODR process did it solely with their mobile phones. Same thing with remote mediation. When we look at what people are using to access their video mediation, they're using their mobile phone. So instead of thinking of mobile devices, mobile design as their second thought, it should be the first thought. And this isn't about like making a design that's more vertical. It's really about every single function there is on your platform and in your communications as well. I just forgot what I was going to say. Oh, so we need to not just think about like, do we do voice to text, but we might be thinking about, should there be an avatar talking to us? You know, what kind of visuals do we want to put forward that are going to be easier to see on a mobile phone? Because not only is it hard to use a phone to search for things, it's also people don't take in as much information when they're using a mobile phone, and we have to figure that out. This is easy. Just text-based ODR 1.0 was available in English, and that is it. That is not acceptable. We have people speaking all sorts of languages. They should be available, and with AI, it gets even more available to have ODR be in multiple languages. Super, super, super important is usability testing. ODR 1.0 is basically tech companies saying, this is what we can do, and putting it out there. Not understanding what the parties might want out of ODR, not understanding what would be most effective for them, simply putting out a technology that didn't work for a lot of people. So testing, researching, all of that is super important to figure out exactly how people want to use ODR, what's most effective for them. So as we go towards AI, are we looking at avatar-based AI? Are we looking at just AI that can talk with you back and forth as text shows up on the screen? What does that look like, and what is most effective for everyone, and not just, you know, the people who create the product? You know, as I look around here, we're all professionals, we're all well-educated. We're not going to have the same experience with the technology as somebody who has a lower level of education, less technology experienced, all of that. So testing and research are super important as you go forward so that you're not creating a product that nobody wants or doesn't work for them. And this is super important as well. Usability testing, not usability testing, I'm sorry. Access to help. In our focus groups, the first thing that people looked for was a phone number to call to find out what they needed to do in order to participate in ODR. So having that ways in which they can get help and showing it everywhere not only gives them the opportunity to get the help, but it also lowers their stress level because they know they can get the help. So very important to make sure that's there. Okay, so we talked about the functionality. Communication is, as I said, part of the whole function. You need to use plain language, provide information in multiple formats. Our usability testers and our focus groups loved having a simple video that was illustrated, or one that showed screenshots of what they were going to see. That gave them a real sense of what the process was going to be. And focus on the needs and concerns of the user and not what you think they might. So when we did our focus groups, we found out that they were very concerned about the security of their data. They were very concerned about confidentiality, and they were very concerned about being bullied on a text-based program. So when we created our models, we ensured that it was communicated to them that their data was secure. We explained what confidentiality was, and we changed the program itself to include a mediator that could facilitate the process, which made them feel so much more comfortable in the usability testing about using online dispute resolution. So it's, again, communication and function going hand in hand. You also want to make sure that the users can envision the process, whether that's through video or using illustrations, etc. Because the more they understand it, the less they're going to put their own expectations on it, and the less they're going to put their own concerns on it as well. What we found when we did the focus groups, we had them looking at what we thought were the best materials that courts were putting out for ODR in the US. We had them look through documents, websites, video. At the end, we said, what is ODR? And they all came up with anything but text-based ODR, which is what they were supposed to be using. They thought maybe a judge, maybe a judge online or mediation online or something like that. So again, they had very different expectations because they filled in the holes. And then when we told them it was text-based, they filled those holes in with all of their concerns. We need to make sure that we're giving them the information so they don't do that. And then finally, more opportunities to get help everywhere. And then I don't have it on here, but user test your communications as well, because we don't always know exactly how to communicate with people, and user testing is going to do that for you. Okay, very quickly, your communications and your platform need to have these 4 elements of trust associated with it. So concern is the process. Do they know that the process is going to be for their benefit? Does the platform demonstrate it? Do your communications demonstrate it? Transparency, Leah, it's right there. Making sure that they understand completely what the process is, what the benefits and risks are, what the rules are, and that the rules apply to everybody so that they feel it's more equal, is also extremely important. Sorry, it's gone backwards. Competence is ensuring that they feel like if they're going to use it, that they're going to actually be able to resolve their case. And finally, integrity. This goes back to helping users envision the process and making sure that what you tell them they're going to get, making sure it's really clear, is what they then get on the platform and see. Because again, if they have the expectations that are different from what you have, they're going to either leave or they're going to be very unhappy. And I don't know why I have all these things. Okay. Very quickly, AI has its own set of trust issues, primarily with people who are diverse or marginalized. They have less trust that the AI model is going to represent them. And then and there's a higher concern about AI amongst people who have less formal education. So there are some hurdles to overcome with AI. Okay, 4 things about power imbalance. We all know about digital literacy, making sure that people who don't really use technology a lot can use the platform. AI literacy, I think that's already been discussed. We have to make sure that people who are less familiar with AI aren't at a disadvantage when they get on a platform that's perhaps AI facilitated. And one of the things that I saw in I'm going to call it ODR 3.0, which is an AI-assisted ODR. One of the platforms actually gave suggestions to people about what they should be telling the AI, which I really appreciated. It needs to be studied to see how effective it is. But the fact that they were trying to do this and trying to level the playing field amongst the parties was really made me hopeful. It really did. The other thing that we have to make sure of is what were the the language that AI uses, and this is particularly true amongst courts when they're using their own documents to inform the AI. The summaries that are put out, the answers that are put out, are not plain language. They're court language. And so there needs to be some way to turn that into plain language rather than confusing people with AI. Technology access is really, it's not about broad. What I really want to focus on is again, that mobile phone use, because not only is it harder to grasp information and see information on it, and harder to use your thumbs to type, there is research out there that in video negotiation, the person with the larger screen did it better in the settlement than the person with the smaller screen. So I don't know how you balance that, but that is something that kind of amazed me. And the other thing is, again, like when we do remote mediations, we're often uploading documents or signing agreements. It's really hard to see those. So being aware of that when you're doing remote mediation. And then I put up disabilities because I wanted to segue to Nick. So disabilities are also need to be addressed when dealing with ODR. That's my information. If you want to talk to me, get in touch with me. And then there's Nick. Oh, yep. There you go. Don't do that. It's really confusing.
Oh, okay. I'm just going to close that. Good afternoon. Can you hear me in the back? Great. So I know it's lunchtime. I'm a little tired. I'm up here, right? You're tired. I will not be offended if you get up. Do whatever works for you. You can put your head down. I won't take it personally. It's after lunch. Whatever works for you. So I am Nick White. I'm with MACRO, which is the Maryland Judiciary's Mediation and Conflict Resolution Office. And I'm really excited about this research. And I love that, Leah, you did a little prompt in your discussion this morning about access and disability. So thank you. And I'll try to remember there's two completely different research. And there's two things that we came to the same finding on. So I love that. Completely unrelated. So I'll try to remember to point those out. If you look at the literature, there's people raising questions about remote mediation disability and what that means. I couldn't find anything in the English language literature that was an empirical study of those issues. If I missed it, let me know. If you know of something in a different language, please let me know. I'd love to find more. So right now I'm viewing this as a first step. There's a lot of academics here. I hope you take it further. I'm in the Maryland Judiciary. They don't let me do research occasionally. I get a little crazy, but they'll let me do it. So if I was going to boil this down into a 15-minute presentation, I'm going to do, it basically comes down to, does remote mediation bridge or create chasms for people? And on the right side, there's that rickety bridge. On the left side, I think is what we hope we're giving, right? It's safe, it's solid, there's extra guardrails, nothing's rusted. I think many people think they're doing this. And in my study of, we've been 31 remote mediation, 62 people went through it. Some were all the way on the left. I'd say more were kind of in that middle area. And we had one or two that was more of that rickety bridge I probably wouldn't advise my grandmother to go down. And we had one scenario where the person said, oh, let me help. And they essentially put some planks down there to help the mediator through the remote process. I'm like, that is great, right? But I think from a court's perspective, from a public policy perspective, ideally we're more to that secure, robust system, right? So I'm not going to go in the research methods. I just want to do an overview so you know where I'm coming from. So design this. Hearing, sight, mobility issues was what we focused on. Originally, I'd also wanted to deal with cognitive, but I was given sage advice and said the level of complexity of that, this is the first research out the door, don't do that. They were so right, because this was complex enough. And to me, interestingly, people still raise those issues. People talked about this is a much safer environment than going into a courtroom emotionally, psychologically, right? So I thought that was interesting, even though I didn't have questions around that, some of those things emerged. So the findings are based on 62 people who self-identified as having a disability participated in 2-party remote mediations, simulations. So there are 31 remote mediations, right? 2 people per, so that's what we get to 62. So I researched them to death, right? Before they're giving us, everyone's giving us a survey, before they went remote mediation, subset was interviewed. Afterwards, everyone surveyed again, more interviews, and the ones who weren't worn out also participated in a focus group. Same regime to the mediators who participated in this. So I do want to take about 2 minutes to read this quote for two reasons. Some of my some numeric data, but I think for me, what really brought this home was the stories that people shared. So I'm going to read this to you. And this came from one of the focus groups. I was in court last year. It was terrifying for a citizen in a courtroom where there was a judge. No one is there to make friends. Flat expressions, not welcoming, harder to get nonverbals, which can be important for a deaf person. So that is a big benefit for remote. I had a case with no lawyer. I did not want to use an ASL interpreter. I'm fluent, but my native language, I'm fluent, but not my native language. In court situations, I want everything in English. So she was born with hearing, and later in life, she lost her hearing. And so that's why English for her is her first language. And it was important in these high stress situations. I asked for a live captioner where I can look at my personal screen. They said yes, but no one in the courtroom when I showed up. I had to look at the court reporter screen, very awkward. Even if the courtroom has accommodations, not an ideal situation. Even in the courtroom, anxiety provoking. So if remote can be set up properly, good. If you can successfully anticipate the needs of people and provide resources. Normally I like to build a storyline, save the findings for the end. I want you to know the findings. There's so much complexity going on, right? Everyone comes to mediation differently for a variety of reasons. My one suggestion, state agency reports online, use it as you will. And I did upload it to to the Google Docs platform here, but you can find it on our website. Appendix A. I recommend you read the report. Don't have time, just go to Appendix A. That is a sample intake protocol. So many of the things we found can be done with a proper intake protocol. So that doesn't matter if you're a court, individual practitioner, you're building a new online platform system. Think about that intake protocol. And I can't say one thing is going to fix it all because I don't know what your intake protocols are. So look at this, draw from ours, say, yeah, this makes sense for us. Oh, we didn't think about that. Build a closer to ideal intake protocol. And it's just not for people with disabilities. My boss for the report is that if everyone does this, everyone going to mediation will be better off, right? Just getting you to think about a variety of things. So Appendix A, now you can fall asleep, okay? I do want to say also, this was not in Maryland. Someone works for Maryland Judiciary. It happened in another state. Not glad that happened, but I'm glad it didn't happen in our judiciary. Okay, the numbers. So, I apologize for the lean. This is, you saw 62 participants, 70 completed the interview. Not everyone agreed to do remote mediation. So 7 people respond. What are your biggest concerns about using remote mediation? 31.5% said the nature of remote forum. So that gets to the one person described it as, I know how I'm going to engage someone face-to-face. I'm not sure how that's going to work remotely, right? So that's that, which I think everyone has that. Well, in this case, about a third had that concern or expressed it. Technology challenges. So I want to read this. And those technology challenges were a mix, and the technology challenges were 27.8%. Were a mix of stable internet, how easy it would be to participate, and one person shared, I'm 74 years old. I do not like 11-digit ID numbers. I just can't remember that many numbers in a row. Even if I write them down in Braille, I can't always put them in time to get into the meeting. I'm not really a Zoom lover. 100% makes sense to me. Never occurred to me, right? These are the type of things that intake will hopefully help address, right? Is it 99% of the population? No. But from a judiciary's perspective, when we're supposed to provide access to the public, we need to be doing a better job of providing access to everyone, whether it's 10%, 99%. No concerns, 24.1%. Lovely. Confidentiality and security, 11.1%. So that I thought was interesting. completely different study, was also a concern expressed in her population. As far as population, I'm not going to say this extrapolates to the world. What I'll say is 62 people, not a huge sample. I don't know of a better empirical study in this area, but that's a start. It was predominantly US based, across the US. We did, for whatever reason, have a subpopulation of a West African group too. So there's at least a little some international flavor there, which I think was a good thing. And then lastly, cost. Turns out people realize cost generally isn't an issue. There are some exceptions to that. So what really matters? Would you recommend remote mediation to someone else? 62 people responded yes. So I got this. That's 100%. I usually don't see programs where 100% say, yes, I'd recommend this to someone else. So I double checked. I made sure my formula is right. I went cell by cell in Excel. Everyone would recommend this to someone else. So I think from a court's perspective, that is amazing. And we can do better. So when you ask them to explain, 58.2% were generally positive comments. It's positive about, as we can imagine, an ADR process in general. Oh, this went smoother. We came to an agreement. But it's also around the ease, which most of them, not all of them, many of them had in regards to the remote nature. Next one, time and cost, 20%. Right? So it turns out people said that was a benefit, right? There wasn't a time and cost. And not surprising, also would be the convenience, 18.2%. So hard of hearing, 3.6%, very small, but I want to read on that too. Hard of hearing. It could be very beneficial for those who are hard of hearing when closed captioning is used because there's so much missed in in-person situations like this one. And these conversations offer too much to risk missing anything. That blew my mind at least a little, that for this individual, it might actually be better. They might be missing less if done properly. So I think that is a really interesting finding. Okay. So it's a little hard to read from this angle. So on the far left, remote mediation reduced any barriers to mediation that you expected to face, right? So what were they expecting? And it reduced those barriers. So 85.5% said yes, it reduced the barriers you're expecting. Taking this research a step forward, did it reduce all of them, or what ones did it reduce, right? 3.6 said no barriers, and I can't read that over there. I think it's 10.9 said no. So there's about 10%, 11% actually, that said no, did not reduce all the barriers, right? So some folks, that's fine. As a judiciary, we're always striving to do better on that, so it's not fine for us in think about statewide. On the right-hand side, remote mediation created any barriers to mediation that you were not expecting. So a barrier they weren't expecting, right? 25.5, so a quarter, said yes, there's a barrier they weren't expecting. So that's why I'm getting into that metaphor of the bridge on the right, holes in the platform. But 3/4, 74.5% said no. So that is wonderful. That 25.5 barriers they weren't expecting. People talked about poor connection by the other party, the remote format, screen fatigue, and more than once, mediators had trouble navigating how to enable captions in Zoom, right? So that's an issue. Though that's an easily solvable issue for mediators, whether private, court roster, to get more comfortable with the tools of the technology, that last one. We don't have enough time to go into detail with that. That's an easily fixable one. So this is after the mediation, and I want to get at least one voice in from the mediators. I use this one because this corresponds fairly well with what participants were saying too. What did not work well today? So 31.3% said connectivity, and that's also interrelated with audio, 18.8%, right? There's a lot of complaints about the connections weren't strong. I don't know if that was regional, international, what was going on, but that was a issue for a lot of people. Camera off. Mediators felt very strongly about this. I did a presentation in Washington, D.C., their court system. I had mediators get up in the room and spread out. Would you require it? Would you not require it? Boy, you want to get a room going, you have this conversation with folks. They were animated. I think this has not been resolved for me, right? Should a court require it? Should not require it? I can argue when it would be a bad requirement and give you plenty of examples when it would be a good requirement. And then what did not work well? General, that is 15.6 today. That was just things that wouldn't fall into any other category. The one example is one mediator talked about they struggled with different people wanting to commute different platforms. They want to text on the phone. They want to use Zoom. They want to use Teams in the pre-mediation. These were all experienced mediators. I intentionally picked the most experienced mediators I could find in Maryland. That does not mean they were all technologically as experienced, perhaps, right? But I wanted to take off the table that there were issues of weak ADR processes. These were well-respected, experienced, but clearly it was a small group, but clearly there were some that could use some brushing up with their technology. Okay, 3 quotes. And this came from focus group. And the person who's saying this, I can still hear her voice. It is very sharp and intense. After 33 years, you should know. There isn't any reason not to be prepared today. And this was talking about the remote mediation. Thankfully, her tone changed. This is a good call. This is great. Different people use different things, even when they have the same disability. That chat function can be a big issue challenge. Next one, captioning working, sure enough. In my instance, the mediator wasn't able to navigate and use another account. This is an example I used. Someone helped fix that bridge, right? A participant had to say, okay, we're going to use my Zoom account. I know how to turn captions on, which is not a big lift. I don't know if it was the level of Zoom account was being used or they just didn't know. And another mediator expressed concern how, in person they get to use flip charts, which I think is a wonderful tool. They actually use the term whiteboard. Zoom has a whiteboard. So I don't know if it's an access thing, what level of Zoom you're using. I need to wrap up. But to me, that says there's room for improvement on the technology skill, right? Last one, quote, best practices test beforehand, lighting a big piece. I need to see a face to read lips. Of course you do, completely logical. Would never occur to me as a mediator, right? These are the things I think are important, at least for the judiciary and others to think about. That isn't a day-to-day issue for many of us, but it can be an important issue. Things to consider. I already talked about we need to do better on the technology side. Appendix A really is my offer of a solution to start to address this. Let's get through that. Final thoughts. Does your intake process engage people, identify possible issues, and pre-test before ADR when needed? That pre-testing can be key. These questions also serve the general public, how to provide a process that maximizes access for everyone. Mainly to the courts, but to you, the private practitioners too, how confident are you that your mediator is able to take full advantage of the technology? And are you prioritizing control over access when you make these tough decisions? Thank you to the judiciary, Brian Polkinghorn, Cynthia Lombardo, Gary Norman. They helped me out with this research project. And contact information, I hope we can move from what I call the Indiana Jones scary bridge to good, strong remote mediation. Thank you.